In 1933, in the quiet town of Tarlac, Philippines, a little girl named Corazon, Cory, Aquino was born into a wealthy yet modest family. From a young age, Cory was known for her calm and gentle nature. She wasn't someone who sought attention or power, instead, she valued faith, humility, and education. Her childhood was filled with prayers, family gatherings, and lessons on compassion, qualities that would later define her as a leader. As she grew older, Cory pursued her studies in the United States, far from the life she had always known. There, she developed independence, discipline, and a sense of responsibility. After completing her education, she returned to the Philippines, unaware that her return would mark the beginning of a destiny greater than she could ever imagine. Upon coming home, Cory met a young, energetic, and passionate man, Benigno, Ninoy, Aquino Jr. Ninoy was already making a name for himself in politics, known for his intelligence and charisma. Despite their different personalities, Cory being quiet and reserved, Ninoy being outspoken and bold, they complemented each other perfectly. Their marriage became a partnership built on love, respect, and a shared vision for their country's future. Together, they dreamed of a better Philippines, never realizing that one day, their bond would face unimaginable trials and inspire an entire nation to fight for freedom and democracy. This was the humble beginning of the woman who would one day lead her people with courage and grace. The 1970s were a dark and uncertain time for the Philippines. President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law, claiming it was necessary to bring order to the country. But in truth, it became a period of fear and silence. Soldiers patrolled the streets, the press was censored, and anyone who dared to speak against the government risked imprisonment, or worse. Among the loudest voices of opposition was Benigno, Ninoy, Aquino Jr., the brave and outspoken husband of Corazon, Cory, Aquino. Ninoy believed that the Filipino people deserved freedom and justice, and he refused to stay silent. Because of his courage, Marcos saw him as a threat and ordered his arrest. Cory suddenly found herself alone, raising their 5 children while her husband languished in prison for years. Despite the hardship, Cory's faith never wavered. She prayed every day for Ninoy's safety and for the country's deliverance from tyranny. She became the quiet strength behind her husband's political struggle, writing him letters, visiting him whenever possible, and keeping his spirit alive. After several years, Ninoy was released on medical grounds and went into exile with Cory and their family in the United States. For a short while, they lived in peace, far from the dangers of the Marcos regime, but even then, both knew their fight for democracy was not over. The darkness of dictatorship still loomed over their homeland, waiting for the spark that would one day ignite a revolution. On August 21, 1983, the world stood still for the Philippines. After years of exile in the United States, Benigno, Ninoy, Aquino Jr. decided to return home. Despite the danger, he believed his people needed him. He told Cory, "The Filipino is worth dying for." Those words would soon become his legacy. As his plane landed at the Manila International Airport, thousands awaited his return with hope, but tragedy struck within seconds. A gunshot echoed through the crowd, and Ninoy fell to the ground, lifeless. He had been assassinated before he could even step outside the airport. News of his death spread like wildfire. The nation was in shock. Grief turned into outrage as millions of Filipinos filled the streets, tying yellow ribbons on trees and cars, symbols of love, hope, and protest. They mourned not just a man, but the dream he carried for their freedom. For Corazon Aquino, the loss was unbearable. She had lost her husband, her partner, and the father of her children. Yet, even in her sorrow, she found strength. The people began to look at her not just as Ninoy's widow, but as the person who could continue his fight. Cory's quiet grace and unwavering faith inspired millions. Without planning it, she became the symbol of a nation's hope, the gentle but powerful voice calling for justice, peace, and democracy. Ninoy's death had awakened the Filipino spirit, and Cory was now its guiding light. By 1986, the tension in the Philippines had reached its breaking point. Years of corruption, injustice, and poverty under Ferdinand Marcos had pushed the nation to the edge. When Corazon Aquino agreed to run for president, it was not out of ambition, but out of duty. The people saw in her the honesty and courage that the country desperately needed. Her campaign became a movement, filled with yellow banners, prayers, and songs of hope. The election was marred by massive fraud and violence. Marcos declared himself the winner, but everyone knew the truth. Anger spread like wildfire. Then, something extraordinary happened. The people rose up. For 4 days in February, millions gathered on EDSA Epifanio de los Santos Avenue, in Manila. Priests, nuns, students, soldiers, mothers, and children stood together, unarmed but unafraid. They carried rosaries, flowers, and pictures of Cory. They prayed, sang, and faced tanks with nothing but faith. The world watched in awe as a peaceful revolution unfolded. This was not a rebellion of weapons, but of hearts united by the desire for freedom. The soldiers began to defect, joining the people's side. Finally, Marcos fled the country, ending 2 decades of dictatorship. When the news broke, cheers and tears filled the air. The impossible had happened, the people had won. Cory Aquino had become the first female president of the Philippines, leading a nation reborn through courage, unity, and peace. As president, Corazon Aquino faced one of the hardest tasks in Philippine history, rebuilding a nation broken by dictatorship and fear. When she took office in 1986, the country's economy was in ruins, corruption was widespread, and trust in government was nearly gone. But Cory faced these challenges with humility, prayer, and determination. Her leadership was not loud or forceful, it was steady, sincere, and guided by her deep faith in God and her people. She restored democracy by rewriting the Constitution, returning freedom of the press, and re-establishing the institutions that Marcos had destroyed. Cory encouraged honesty in public service and reminded everyone that power was a sacred responsibility, not a privilege. Although her presidency was far from perfect, marked by coup attempts and political struggles, she never resorted to violence or revenge. Instead, she led with compassion and forgiveness, proving that moral strength can be more powerful than force. Even after stepping down in 1992, Cory remained a respected figure, often called the mother of Philippine democracy. She continued to inspire young leaders and stood firm whenever the country's freedom was threatened again. When Corazon Aquino passed away in 2009, millions of Filipinos once more filled the streets, this time dressed in yellow, not to protest, but to honor her memory. Her legacy lives on in every Filipino who believes in peace, justice, and the power of the people. Cory's quiet courage forever changed the course of her nation's history.